Idyllwild Arts respectfully acknowledges the Kawishba Kawiagna, also known as the Cahuilla Band of Indians, and all 9 sovereign bands of Cahuilla people who have stewarded this land throughout the generations and continue to steward this land for all future generations. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Shalia Ben. I'm the Assistant Director of the Native American Arts Program and Community Outreach here at Idyllwild Arts. This year, the invitational exhibition At Creation is here located in our Parks Exhibition Center. Our programming this year will be online and will commence with a series of Michael Kabotie Artist Talks that will be led by the artists that are in our exhibition this year. Tonight, we're going to kick it off with the curator of the exhibition, Nina Sanders, and one of the artists who we had the privilege of welcoming here on campus to install an installation, Pease. I'd like to say thank you to our generous sponsors who have made this possible. The Agua Caliente Band of Cahuilla Indians, the Chickasaw Nation, San Manuel Band of Mission Indians, and an anonymous foundation. I'd also like to extend my gratitude to Joe Baker and Taria Smith, who are the Native American Arts Festival Week consultants. Their advice and their counsel throughout this year has made this possible. Thank you. Let's get started now. I'll introduce Nina Sanders. Nina Sanders is Crow. She's a curator, writer, and has worked in the arts for many years. She's most notably known for her exhibition, Apsáalooke, Women and Warriors, that opened last year in March in 2020 at the Field Museum. We had the opportunity to work with her this past year to create At Creation. Now, without further ado, I turn it over to Nina Sanders. Nina, thank you.
I'm here at the Idyllwild Arts Center in the heart of Cahuilla country. I'd like to tell you a little bit about our exhibition At Creation with 7 artists: Eliza Naranjo Morris, Kevin Poyer, Jordan Craig, Ben Pease, Sarah Biscaradini, Drew Michael, and Luann Redeye. All of us came together here to sort of have a conversation about our experiences amidst a pandemic and the global event that is BLM and all of the different ways that that shaped our experiences and our perspectives on the world. At Creation is essentially a narrative about how each of these different artists created, were compelled to create, the concepts behind the creation, and even the physical manifestations of that creation. All of this started and came from a relationship that I have with the wonderful Shalia Ben, who is the assistant director here at the Idyllwild Arts Native American program. In our conversations during quarantine, we would ponder, speculate, obsess, create solutions for some of the things that we're facing in museums, in Native American art, and in trying to cultivate narratives that essentially tell the stories of our people, the way that they see the world. How can we help people see through the lens of these incredible artists, 7 of which are here, and there are many, many thousands more, obviously, but this sort of coalesced into multiple different projects, and we had conversations with many different people. And finally, after a year of conversation, we finally bring to you At Creation, which is a conversation between myself, Shalia, Idyllwild Arts, and these 7 different artists. So here we are in front of Jordan Craig's pieces. To my right, we have You're Making Me Blush, and to my left, we have Stop Flirting With Me. Both of these pieces were created amidst pandemic, while Jordan was contemplating painting, and even sort of pushing back against the idea of painting again. However, her sister, who was living with her at the time, compelled her to paint once more. Thankfully for us, this was the very first piece that she produced in the 2020 pandemic. Don't Make Me Blush is essentially a piece about these muted tones that communicate her experience in the middle of a pandemic. Nothing was colorful, nothing was bright, nothing felt beautiful anymore. This is essentially a reflection of how she felt inside and the world that she saw around her. Everything has sort of lost its color. However, once she had completed it, The way that she processed her experience amidst the pandemic by using these colors as a reflection of her own personal experiences and emotions sort of awakened her senses to bring her to paint Stop Flirting With Me. As you can see, the two have similar sort of design elements that come from design traditions that are of the Northern Cheyenne tribe. You can see the vertical lines, the symmetry, the different stars, the red stars. Each of these two paintings are very much related to each other in form and in design, but they feel very different. They communicate very different concepts within the use of color, within the sort of way that you engage with the painting. One brings you in, and the other sort of just keeps you where you are. Jordan explains that Stop Flirting With Me was inspired by her sister, who, whenever they were doing something in the middle of the pandemic, whether they were engaging with maybe family members or taking a walk down the road, if someone told her, "You look beautiful, how are you doing today? We love your shoes," her sister would teasingly say, "Stop flirting with me." And this sense of humor, this way of seeing the world, this teasing, is an essential part of getting through something like a pandemic, part of a time that essentially we really didn't feel like there were too many things on earth that were funny. And Jordan and her sister managed to accomplish this in creating this relationship that inspired Jordan to paint again and inspired Jordan to create incredible, larger-than-life, colorful pieces like Stop Flirting With Me. Here we have Sarah Biscar-Dilly, Chumash, who is of this place. Her ancestral lands would be considered Santa Barbara and north of Santa Barbara and all of the territories encompassed in there. Sarah brings us this incredible textile as well as this media piece that are both an exploration, maybe even a love letter to the land that she comes from. This experience that she has with the land that manifested into these two different pieces were essentially experiences that happened during the 2020 pandemic as she traveled home, away from work, out of the office, and invested herself into these spaces that she understands to be her ancestral homeland. If you look at each of these pieces, they are distinctively similar, but also incredibly different in that they are sensational on their own. In the media piece, we experience Sarah's hands exploring the acorns. We hear the noise of the land itself as it's brought together by this person, Sarah, who is an extension of the land herself. The textile, in the way that I've experienced it and in understanding Sarah's journey in creating it, would be considered something of a map or a portrait or an actual physical work that is the poetry of the land itself, as the different components that are embedded into the piece come from the beaches, the forests, the land from which she walked and which she heals. And so in this, she takes this poem, her experience with the land itself, as she is an extension of that, and she turns it into these magnificent pieces and gives them to us to help us understand her place, her purpose, the land itself through her lens. Here to my left, we have this incredible mask titled Brown Angel by Yupik Inuit artist Drew Michael. This particular piece comes from Drew's experience within the pandemic and the BLM movements, and this incredible anxiety and stress that I think all of us felt in these moments. Asking questions, praying for healing, understanding. And in Drew's experience, from what he's explained, is that he was experiencing incredible amounts of anxiety and stress surrounding all of these different events that essentially, I think, created a space where none of us felt safe. And so as he put this out into the universe, this hope to understand, he drew in the answers, and those answers came in the form of moths. These moths started to come into his spaces. They would rest. They essentially would watch and exist in a peaceful way that essentially brought him to a place where it brought him peace. It brought him calm. And in some way, this brown angel, this moth that rested next to him and communicated these messages of healing, they manifested into this work of art, which is essentially a lens for us to understand the different ways that a person can heal through creating art and through experiencing it. I personally would like to say that I don't think I'll ever see a moth the same again after having this experience with Drew. Luann Redeye, Seneca beater, painter, professor, has created multiple pieces for At Creation to tell stories about her family and her community. This particular series, the Frame series, were essentially created by Luann to tell the stories of the people in her family. She reframes, literally and figuratively, the stories of her family, the people in her community, to help others understand that though we come from extreme trauma and hardship, we practice love, resilience, and reclamation. These frames are essentially a reclamation of her history, her people's histories. And through each piece, you see the amount of work, of love, of craftsmanship, of hardship, endurance, is weaved into, beaded into, stitched into, and imagined into each of these pieces. Luann is literally recreating her own history. She's reframing the way that her own children and their children will see their family, their ancestors. This particular piece was an oil painting done by Luann. Another good example of something that you would imagine to be classical in every sense of the word. It's an oil painting. It exhibits perfect shadows, perfect lines. The colors, the shapes, all of it would essentially tell us that we would expect to see this piece in maybe the Metropolitan Museum of Art. However, the content would suggest something different. Again, Luann is reframing her people's histories, her families, and in this case, a matriarch, the hands of a matriarch. Where have these hands been? What kind of stories can they tell us? What have they created? This is who Luann is. Another of Luann's paintings, something you would understand to be conventionally precise, beautiful even. But the story within, the narrative that's embedded into this piece tells a story of a very complicated character. A man who, obviously in his face, the way that Luann depicts him, is someone who's peaceful, reflective. But also when we look past him, when we look into his life, you see a hole in the wall. You see food sort of gathered into a bunch there, maybe even government-issued food or commodities, things that many Indigenous people have survived off of. It's been part of our subsistence. These are the stories that are embedded into Luann's works. When she creates, she thinks about what she's teaching us. She's creating new realities and new narratives for us in the way that we see her world. This is how we start to re-understand our place. Kevin Poyer. There are some people on this earth who will always ground you, remind you to ask you why you are here and what you are doing. Kevin is one of those people. He will gently, sometimes teasingly remind you that you're a human being and the answers have always been inside you. At our creation, we were told, but sometimes we need to be reminded. Kevin reminds us with both his work and his words. Eliza Naranjo Morse. Eliza is a creation. She makes homes, tells stories, transforms communities, and still has time to teach art to school children. Her work is gently elusive, coaxing us to ask curious questions and helping us to imagine even more curious answers. Eliza's work is beguilingly enlightened. She has things to teach us, but she only gives us just enough to awaken our own imagination. She reminds us to imagine our own answers. Here on my left, you see a military issue blanket with a painting. This is part of an installation that's being done here by Ben Pease, Apsáalooke, Northern Cheyenne artist. We typically know him for his incredibly elegant oil paintings and acrylic paintings. Pieces that we would imagine hanging in our living room, pieces that we would hand down from one generation to the next. However, one of the things that most people don't know about Ben Pease is how incredibly deep thinking and insightful he is. One of the things that Ben Pease enjoys doing most is putting together these concepts for installation. Part of his creative genius is the capacity in which he is able to imagine things like this. When this is completed, in the center there'll be a mound of earth, a buffalo hide, multiple other blankets, each telling a different story, situated in the gallery to face north, east, south, west. Each position essentially describing an experience, a thought, an imaginative component, maybe something that he has to teach us. All of this is through the lens of Ben Pease. This particular piece at creation is something that Ben has just wanted to create for quite some time. He's wanted to paint on blankets and tell stories through blankets. Blankets being an integral part of our Indigenous communities. As we are born, we are given blankets. As we walk through life, we're wrapped in many blankets. And as we pass into other side camp, we are given and enveloped in blankets. Blankets to Indigenous people tell incredible stories. And in this piece, Ben's piece, he's telling stories through blankets.
Thank you, Nina. That was beautiful. The next speaker will be Ben Pease. Ben Pease is Crow in Northern Cheyenne, and he joined us this past week for the installation of his work that focuses on blankets and the relationships that us as Native people have with blankets. The work is called Protectors, and I will turn it over now to Ben to share a few more words about his work.
My name is Ben Pease. My Apsáalooke name is Steals the Guns from Two Enemy Camps. I am honored to be here at Idyllwild to present my perspective on what this means, on what creation means to myself and my people and my creativity. I'm here presenting an installation titled Ishpinaja, Protector, asking questions of who our protectors really are or have been throughout the years. The concept Ishpinaja, Protectors, of what this installation is titled after, is asking questions of our protectors, of those people who lead us, those people who take care of us and protect us and surround us. It's also commenting on the use of blankets in our cultures. We give babies blankets, Pendletons. We wrap our dead ones in blankets. We surround ourselves throughout our lives with blankets. And ultimately, our protectors, sometimes they leave us cold. And this is my perspective, this is where I'm coming from, this is what I've seen throughout my life. This is part of my experience. In understanding what this means in a contemporary sense, coming off the tail end of a global pandemic, this is a powerful thing. These protectors have been used against us many times under the guise of warmth and comfort. We've accepted them because we've had to in a lot of ways. And we knew that they would keep us warm and keep us safe. But what we didn't know was that they would take our loved ones from us. They would take ourselves away from us. Instead of keeping us warm, they got us sick. In some instances, blankets were infected intentionally as weapons of destruction for our people. I've selected 4 separate blankets for this installation. The first behind me being a U.S. Army blanket featuring Chief Sitting Bull, Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer, President Lincoln, and Apsáalooke Chief Plentycoo. The second blanket is a Pendleton blanket, a classical Pendleton blanket. The third is a Hudson Bay blanket featuring 4 people, one of them being Auntie Queen Elizabeth, and the fourth blanket being a 8th generation Bethany Yellowtail blanket featuring some of our contemporary protectors and leaders and groundbreakers, ground shakers, ultimately leading us into the future. The first to focus on this blanket is Auntie Wilma Mankiller, first female principal chief of the Cherokee people. Second is Uncle Billy Frank Jr., third is Deb Holland, and fourth is Wilma Mankiller in the red. And these are contemporary protectors, those people who are leading into new generations and leading us into the future. Moving back in time here, the figure in the blue, this is Louis Riel. In the pink, this is Queen Elizabeth. In the red is Chief Crowfoot, and the yellow is Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada. And this is an antique 3.5 star or 3.5 stripe Hudson Bay blanket. Here we have Nez Perce Chief Joseph and Geronimo over the top of President Trump and the crying Indian, Iron Eyes Cody. This is on a classical Pendleton that I was given in a giveaway many years ago. And this blanket has had a story, it's had a path, and I've been carrying it for a few years. And this is the individual blanket, the one that really set off this journey in trying to understand what blankets mean to me today, and mean to my family, and mean to our people, and the greater of Indigenous people throughout North America, throughout the world. This is, I believe, like a 1949 U.S. Army blanket, Army green. Here I've beaded U.S. on the logo of the blanket. And from the back we have President Lincoln, then Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer, Chief Plentycoo, and Chief Sitting Bull. Our origins of creation are cross-sections of our life in this world. Apsáalooke epistemologies, they cultivate complex, cyclical spiritual economies. The stars and worlds above guide us in all things holy and earthly. We connect our prayers, thoughts, and experiences to them as fluidity of time stirs. The promise of a better existence becomes cloudy when we devote ourselves to the debts of trusting our protectors, for better or worse. For centuries, Indigenous people have lived in perpetual flux in confronting the masked gifts of colonialization and the civil world. Even in adapting to embrace our resiliency, our protectors come steeped in deceit and disguise. There is power in growth and change. Here we confront death and celebrate life by giving breath to new ways of making medicine while we still can. Native people know and respect disease like the treacherous parts of the river, as friends and foe, enemy and ally. Our societies have built structure and shifted and adapted in relationship to disease and sickness. In response to many encounters with disease, our people have formed or grown new practice and culture, leading to new traditions. Tribal societies merged and melded, as did clans and bands and tribes in the wake of disease. We began practicing new ways in our newly formed groups. Formative ceremonies, prayers, and dances arose in the wake. Western science may dispel many of our cultural combatants against disease, although it cannot fully account for our resiliency in the face of genocide. Perspective of Western society has long defined our ways as holistic or pagan or ritualistic or heathen. blankets and blankets and blankets and blankets. Rotting rations, confinement, imposed religion, lack of immunity, no health centers, religious and cultural persecution, lack of access to antibiotic vaccines, disease, bacteria, virus. Confronting death by celebrating life. Visions and dreaming, fasting, active life, ceremony, isolation, medicine, relationship, prayer, vaccination, inoculation, quarantine, malnutrition, moving camp, biological warfare, federal policy, germs, genocide, education, oral history, clan system, societal function, IHS, burning homes, nutrition, stress, variola major and minor, iron deficiency, anemia, smudging, rats as carriers, infected blankets, blankets and blankets and blankets. Virgin soil epidemics, sweat lodges, bathing, song and dance, drum and rattle, catharsis, emetics, blankets and blankets and blankets.
Yeah, Ben, that was beautiful. On behalf of Idyllwild Arts Foundation, I thank you for joining us this evening. Be sure to join us next week with Drew Michael, who is a Inupiaq and Yupik, and we'll talk about his work included in the show. Be sure to join us also online at idyllwildarts.org to take a look at all of the works of art, read about the artists, and to learn a little bit more about at creation. Again, my name is Shalia Bennett, and I thank you for joining us this evening. Yeah, bye-bye.